welcome Representative Ken Corbett to the meeting. He's filling in for Representative Hoffman today. Okay, so we'll start with the bill hearing on HB 2351. That's the liability protection bill, and we'll have Charles Reimer start with a description of what the bill is. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Senate Bill, House Bill 2351 provides for protection from liability for businesses that choose to engage with secondary schools in work learning programs. The first part of the bill provides that if a school district has purchased applicable insurance coverage, then a business that accepts a secondary student in a work-based learning program shall not be subject to civil liability for any claim arising from the student's negligent act or omission during the student's participation in the program at the business or work site. So that's one part of this liability protection. The second part is that if a school district has purchased applicable insurance coverage, then a business that accepts a secondary student in a work-based learning program shall not be subject to civil liability for any claim for bodily injury to the student or sickness or death by accident of the student arising from the business's negligent act or omission during the student's participation in the program at the business or work site. Subsection B on the first page provides that except for gross negligence or willful misconduct, the school district is to be solely responsible for any loss to a student resulting from bodily injury or sickness or death by accident arising from any negligent act or omission on the part of the school district or the business during the student's participation in the program at the business or work site. There are some definitions that are contained in the bill. Work-based learning program is defined on the bottom of page 1 to include work study, on-the-job training, job shadowing, internships, clinicals, practicums, apprenticeships, co-ops, and other similar types of activities that has to be incorporated into the secondary coursework or related to a specific field of study. It must integrate knowledge and theory learned in the classroom with practical application, development of technical skills and proficiencies in a professional work setting, and shall not include wages, salary, or other compensation to the secondary student. Business on the top of page 2 is broadly defined to mean not only for-profit businesses, but also cities, counties, townships, fire departments, law enforcement departments, universities, schools, technical colleges. So a broad definition for the term business at the top of page 2. There's a requirement that the business enter into an agreement with a school district for the work-based learning program, and the business to be able to benefit from the liability protection must directly supervise a student who is participating in the work-based learning program. The bill also amends a couple of statutes to provide that, basically to provide a definition of school-sponsored activity. These statutes already provide that the Board of Education of any school district may purchase insurance insurance against loss resulting from sickness or bodily injury or death by accident on the part of students. And so the additional language there provides a definition of school-sponsored activity so that this grant of discretion to school districts to purchase insurance contracts is also going to include insurance for travel provided by the school or business to and from participation in a work-based learning program involving training or work activities conducted at the premises or under the direction of a business participating in the program. And that is what the bill does.
Committee questions for the reviser, Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we had this bill in our committee last year, Chuck. Is this bill identical or is there anything different this year?
I believe this is the same as the bill from last year.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. When we had it drafted as it was amended by the committee of the whole on the floor last year. Any other questions for the reviser? Any online? Seeing none. Okay, committee, this bill has been being worked on for, I think, a little over 4 years now. It's been a long process, and it's been through many different renditions. This bill came out of the Governor Collier's Education Council that I was appointed to. One of the things that we found was, as we talk about quite frequently in here, a shortage for skilled workers. And the fact that these jobs are really good and that there are a lot of students out there that would excel in a trade type job. The problem that we found was, in order to get these kids into businesses, the idea was to get them to go tour businesses or go work at a business for an hour a day during school so that they could learn the trade or see if they like the trade. The issue was always the business was afraid to open its doors because if you let a kid come in, what's going to happen to my liability insurance if they're messing around and get hurt or if something happens? And so the whole idea of this bill was to make it so that if a kid was in shop class and got hurt, it would react the same way as if he was in a business learning situation. So it'd be like going to shop class at school. So that's kind of how this whole thing came about. And in the first couple of years, we had a lot of work comp questions and issues and debates. And we got past all of that and found a solution. So that's what this bill is. And we'll go ahead and open up the proponent side. And we'll start with Natalie Bright. Welcome back to committee.
Am I on? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, honorable committee members. I am Natalie Bright here on behalf of the Society for Human Resource Management. We are in support of House Bill 2351 because we believe it is a great conduit to help create that pipeline for those key jobs that we need to fill. And by giving those students that opportunity to job shadow and experience an opportunity, what it might be, will help guide them in their career paths so that they can start earlier in their career paths and actually figure out if this is something they want to do or not. And by addressing the liability, unfortunately, we do live in a litigious society, and these are things that we probably need to make sure we have in place. It'll help employers feel more comfortable welcoming them in. I think it'll make it safer for the students. And so we appreciate the effort of this committee to take this issue on and help assure that that pipeline for high school students to job shadow and to have some experience before they go on to higher ed stays in place. With that, I'd stand for questions.
Committee, any questions?
Thank you.
Next up, we have Kevin Walker, Overland Park Chamber. Kevin, are you here or are you online? Okay, I'm not seeing Kevin Walker, so we'll move his testimony to written only for now. If we hear from him during this hearing, we'll put him on. Next up, we have Shahira Stafford, Kansas Cooperative Council. Are you here? Sorry, written only. Kansas Association of School Board. Are you here in person? Yep. Microphone on.
B.A. Booth, United School Administrators of Kansas, and we're providing joint testimony with the Kansas School Board Association. And we stand neutral to this bill, just for not for the fact that we want this bill to happen. We want to do everything we can do to make sure this bill moves forward, but we want to make sure at the same time that we're not reducing or creating an issue for our schools that are currently in the program right now. So we have a number of, and really a growing percentage of students and businesses participating in work-based learning. We have a number of students taking the opportunity to participate in this program. Right now, our student accident insurance, as Mr. Chairman talked about earlier, covers a lot of those situations that would happen to a student, as long as the student is responsible for those acts. So student accident insurance does cover the student for injury, loss, or even death. And so right now, that's the primary purpose of that insurance with the work-based learning. But this bill would require school districts to provide coverage for students' injuries, loss, or regardless of who's at fault or who's negligent. And our concern is right now that there's not an insurance program out there or insurance policy that would cover a business on behalf of the school. And that creates the issue that we're concerned about. Without that policy available, that it could actually work in opposition of what we're trying to accomplish, that we may lose students participating because that policy is not available. And I believe you have written testimony from the Kansas Insurance Brokers Association kind of verifying that, and we have Rod Spangler with us from KSB also discussing that. But that insurance piece, I think if we had it available, would work and actually cover what we have. But until that's in place, this bill, I believe, would limit the opportunities for our students. The other thing that I'd like to add is there's a couple of pieces in here on page 2 of the bill that talks about travel. And if the business is covering the travel, that would not be covered by the student accident insurance. That would be covered by the business's insurance, auto insurance. And so there's a little bit of misplacement there. And as far as sickness, it wouldn't cover traditional sicknesses based upon just flu or cold or whatever. It would have to be a sickness that would be caused by the business itself, something at the business that would cause the illness. So there's a couple of pieces within on page 2 that we would encourage some additional conversation about. And then that's all I have, and I'm happy to stand for questions. And I've got Angie Stahlbaumer and Rod Spangler with me as well to help answer questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. On the travel part, I think that our intent last year was to make it where if the students were traveling, like driving their own car, they were responsible for.
Right, and that's correct.
And that happened, right?
Right.
So you're talking about if a business were to supply.
If the business was going from one location to another location with a student in the business's vehicle, that would be the responsibility of the business's insurance, auto insurance.
Okay. And then on the policy not available, it was, if I recall right, I know we had some discussions, which is why we made it optional to purchase. But most of the insurance companies that we spoke with, it was going to be more or less a actuarial deal where they would ask a question, do you participate in these programs and how many students? And then they would apply, if any charge, a small charge per pupil that was in it to cover you. If that's not what's happening, then we probably need to know that before we work this bill. And I do apologize. You did reach out to me late last week with a meeting request. I have been buried, and so I haven't been able to get back to you, but I would like to meet with you before we move forward with this.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Rod Spangler from Kansas Association of School Boards. That's kind of a very nuanced situation around insurance and risk on twofold. The current policy that's on the market today is a student accidental injury policy. Has nothing to do with student liability. So that is a completely uncovered area. So it's accidental injury only. It currently covers all school-sponsored and sanctioned events, which is, this is an extension of school-sponsored and sanctioned events. So that's okay. Part of school-sponsored and sanctioned is also school-sponsored transportation or school-sponsored and sanctioned transportation. So in the event, if a business says, we'll pick these kids up, then that will exclude the current policy on the market for accidental injury when it deals with transportation to and from. If it's an accidental injury event at the business, the student accidental injury policy will take place. What does not exist on the market today for schools to even purchase is a accidental injury plus liability. That is the nuanced issue that we're mostly concerned about.
So if a student were to be injured in shop class, they would be covered.
Not necessarily. Today, no. If a school purchases the student accident coverage on behalf of their students, which is currently voluntary, that student's accidental injuries would be covered. Today, if a school, and there's probably about 100 schools who do not purchase that coverage on behalf of their students, is currently uncovered and would fall on the parent's health insurance. There is a med pay only section in general liability policies that exists on all general liability policies. So there's a potentially a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 med pay that would offset some of those medical bills. But to just blanket statement, if a student loses a finger in shop class, the school is liable. They're only liable if there's gross negligence, not school-sponsored and sanctioned, equipment in poor working condition, that type of thing.
Okay, and if that student were to sue the school, where would the liability, they just can't sue you?
Anybody can sue anybody for any reason
Right,
at any
okay.
time.
So the same situation would be if they were in a workplace situation. My guess is the school is vetting these businesses before they just let students go work there.
I'd assume so. It's probably a two-way street.
And so, right, and so what would be the difference if they were at the shop and got hurt and sued you, or were at school?
Well, I would assume people buy insurance, and that one of the major issues is on the school's liability policy, the student is not a policy holder. So, meaning policy participant. So the school's general liability today does not extend to the students. So you can sue, certainly, if that's the outcome, you can certainly sue for that, but and you can potentially purchase coverage as this bill gives us the opportunity to, but there's just not something on the market that both gives student accidental injury plus liability. There's the one that's out there today that is in existence and is available, but does not cover the liability piece of it.
Okay. And it doesn't cover the liability piece of it at school either?
No.
Right, okay, so.
It's not there. It's not on the market at all, regardless of whether that's work-based learning or in shop class right in the brick and mortar building.
Any other questions? Representative Highland?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, you're saying not everybody buys the insurance. I think I've heard you say there were 100 school districts that do not buy the insurance. What are they doing then? Nothing?
Correct. Some school districts purchase voluntary student accident insurance, which covers all sports active ks.sponsored events, Johnny on the playground, Jane on the playground, and the shop class. There's 3 or 4 retail carriers that operate in Kansas, and I'm going to guess probably 175 to 200 school districts purchase that coverage on behalf of their students. The others offer what they call voluntary insurance, which the parent could pick up and purchase on their own. And of the statistics we have, probably less than 1% of parents buy that coverage that student accident coverage on their own. So there is no liability. There's always liability. We always talked about this last year, even duty of care. There's a duty of care on every side. Duty of care for the employer to have good working equipment, school, highly trained, competent students, and the student to be trainable. Everybody has duty of care. But right now, today, to answer your question, Representative, there probably is many students that are currently on their parents' insurance, and that's the only coverage that they currently have, or the small med pay that exists in the school district's liability policy. So if it's a small injury, sutures or something like that, or a slip and fall, it probably could potentially be covered by the school under that small med pay area. But if it's a substantial injury, chances are that it's going to go on the parents.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would point out also, though, that originally we had a hold harmless clause in there for the student, and by your recommendation, we removed that. So the student, if the student is at fault, their insurance would apply, their personal insurance would apply, just as it would at school if they were at fault. And so that was one of the concerns that we addressed of yours from last year, I believe. Is that the way you read this?
That I don't know for certain. The way that I read it, it still seems to put a lot of ownership on the school and takes no ownership at the employer level.
Yeah, that is the intent.
That's a small
That is the
concern.
intent of this bill.
And the other piece is really, we can't make a school, the current general liability policies that schools carry, the students are not a policyholder of. Now, the parents will probably sue either A, the business, or B, the school, or C, both, in the event of some major injury. That's certainly
Right.
it's out there without anybody buying anything.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very
you.
much. Is there anyone else here or online that intends to testify as an opponent or as a proponent on this bill?
Mr. Chairman, Jason Watkins, Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you.
I think we got testimony turned in, but if we didn't, I apologize, and we'll make sure we get it to the committee. Did just quickly want to rise in support and thank you for your work on this over the years. This is an issue that a lot of our manufacturers in Wichita have brought to our attention. Mrs. Bright, I think, did a nice job of pointing out that there's a lot of opportunities for today's young people to be successful and realize the American dream without necessarily having a four-year college degree. Allowing these students to get into the workplace and actually get firsthand experience is an important part of that process, and them determining what they may be interested in terms of their future. The business community wants to participate in that, but certainly they do have liability concerns. And I'm no expert on insurance, but I feel like this bill does a pretty decent job of addressing that concern, at least from the business community's standpoint in terms of liability. I don't know that anybody in the business community has said to the Wichita Chamber they have ultimate concerns about the liability that the student might face. I think what we've been trying to work with the committee on is that liability if that student were to get hurt while they were in that workplace. And I do believe that you have a product that adequately addresses that, Mr. Chairman. So sounds like there's still work to be done, but at the end of the day, we would really encourage the committee to move this bill forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Mr. Watkins? Seeing none, thank you. Is there anyone else here that wishes to testify as a proponent? Okay, seeing none. Are there any other neutral conferees? Kansas? Tony Anderson, are you online? Or are you written only for neutral? Okay, well, Tony will be written only for neutral. And I'm showing no opponents. Is there anyone here that wishes to testify in opposition to this bill? Seeing none. Go ahead and close the hearing on HB 2351. We'll open hearing on HB 2331. With that, we'll have Charles Reimer tell us about the bill.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 2331 concerns the giving the Secretary of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism the ability to transfer regular landowner or tenant hunt on your own land big game permits, specifically with regards to deer, from the original recipient of the permit to a non-resident of the state of Kansas. And there are requirements that the bill sets out for this transfer system that the Secretary of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism is to establish. First, any transfer is not to occur until all non-resident hunting permits have been filled in each management unit where these regular landowner or tenant hunt on your own land big game permits were issued. Any recipient of a non-resident hunting permit is not eligible for a transfer. The Secretary of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism is to allow the transferee to designate whether they are going to hunt antlered or antlerless whitetail deer or only antlerless whitetail deer pursuant to the permit. The Secretary can charge a transfer fee not to exceed half the cost of a non-resident hunting permit. And it also may not exceed the cost of the original permit for the landowner or tenant hunt on your own land big game permit that was issued. The Secretary of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism may restrict the location that the transferee can hunt whitetail deer to the same area that the original permit was for. The number of regular landowner or tenant hunt on your own land big game permits to be transferred is to be limited to one per landowner or tenant. And the Secretary of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism is not to prohibit nor restrict the sale of regular landowner or tenant hunt on your own land big game permits by the original permit holder to a non-resident, so long as the transfer is approved under the transfer system. There is sort of a question that I would like to make clear, or an issue. That is that the bill contains language that would restrict the location where a transferee may hunt in the same area that the landowner or tenant was eligible to hunt, and would restrict the number of permits transferred under the bill to one per landowner or tenant. That's a defined term under the bill. Landowner is defined as a resident. Actually, it's under a different statute, 32-937. Landowner is defined as a resident owner of farm or ranch land of 80 acres or more located in the state of Kansas. The definition of tenant under that statute is restricted to individuals who are actively engaged in the agricultural operation of 80 acres or more of Kansas farm or ranch land. So under KSA 32-937G, a landowner or tenant may receive one hunt on your own land permit for each 80 acres owned by such landowner or operated by such tenant. However, the bill specifically limits the number of permits that can be transferred to non-residents to one per landowner or tenant. And that restriction is found, as I noted, on page 2 of the bill, lines 2 through 5. So, Chairman, that is what the bill does.
Charles, and did you address the email from Kyle Hamilton?
Yes, Chairman, I did.
Okay. Representative Corbett, did you have a question?
Yes, sir. Basically, when it comes down to the end of this, it's one permit per landowner with 80 acres. He has 8,000 acres. It's just one permit. 80 acres is kind of the minimum, and that's kind of the basis of what we're getting to the end of this bill about, right? One tag and 80 acres kind of gets you in the game, right?
Representative, that is correct.
Thank you, Charles.
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions there on that, Charles. So the same area or the same land, is that accurate? Explain that for me.
Representative, that language is found on the bottom of page 1 of the bill. If you look at lines 34, 35 at the bottom, and then the top of page 2, line 1, basically it indicates that the Secretary of Wildlife, Parks and Tourism has a discretion to restrict the location that the transferee, the non-resident who has obtained the permit, where that transferee may hunt, to the same area that the landowner or tenant who transferred the license was eligible to hunt.
But not necessarily the same land, and is that correct? Area, land,
Well,
there's a little difference there.
Representative, my understanding is that these licenses are sort of based on the ownership of land, and so as I understand this bill, it would be restricted to the same land that the original recipient of this regular landowner or tenant hunt on your own land big game permit, where they would be entitled to hunt. So they're, so that's how the bill sets that out.
Okay, so let me make it a little more clear. So it would be land that he either owned or had control over.
That is my understanding. I'll take a look at the statute reference to make sure about that, but that's my understanding of how this would work. And, I might defer to the Secretary of Wildlife, Parks and Tourism if they're a conferee as to, technical aspects of how these permits are issued as well.
Okay, one more question. How many landowners and tenants are there in the state that would qualify for this permit?
I'm sorry, Representative, I would not know.
Thousands?
I wouldn't want to speculate. Perhaps the Secretary, if the Secretary is a conferee, the Secretary may have an idea, or that might be something that researchers might be able to look into, but I wouldn't want to speculate. I have no idea.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Charles, not to belabor the issue, but let's say there was several owners of a plot of land. Did those owners each be able to transfer one of their current deer tags, or is it just one for the plot of land?
So I believe, Chairman, it would be limited to one per landowner or tenant as defined. And so if there are more than one landowner, owners or tenants with respect to that particular land, then I guess it would be, that number.
Okay, and these are tags that are already issued to the landowners, correct? So these are not additional deer tags.
That's correct, Chairman. They're not additional at all. They are already, the landowner or tenant is entitled to these permits under the current system. And all this bill does is permit the secretary to set up a transfer system, limited transfer system with respect to these permits that already are available to the landowners or tenants.
And then once a tag is transferred, it cannot be transferred again, correct?
Chairman, there is no provision in the bill for transfers of a tenant of the license by the transferee.
Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is for the revisor. This just sounds very familiar. Did we see this bill? Have we seen this bill before?
Representative, yes. I think it may have been maybe a couple of years, but this bill was a similar bill was before, at least a similar bill was before the committee in the past.
Do you happen to know what bill that was, the number?
I think back in 2018, it would have been HB 2208 and maybe HB 2743. But those I just looked up quickly. I haven't actually checked to make sure those are the right ones. So if you give me a moment, I'll do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
If I might add, last year's bill was 2167.
So Representative, we did work this in 2018, and that's when we scaled it down to, instead of just being able to sell deer tags, we scaled it down to the deer tag had to be one that you currently owned, and you could sell only one, no matter how large, how much land you had. And so we limited it to almost nothing so that we could see how it worked and look at it down the road. And that's the bill that we had redrafted. Representative Carpenter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on that, so if the Wildlife and Parks only issued, last year we issued 179,000 permits. So none of these permits would be in addition to that amount that we just issued for that year?
Awesome.
No, these would not be additional. These are transfers of permits that, as stated, are for landowners or tenants, hunt on your own land, big game permits. So they're not additional. And I'd also note that that the bill provides that transfers do not occur until all non-resident hunting permits have been already filled in each management unit that were where the land at issue is we're talking about. And furthermore, that any recipient of a non-resident hunting permit is not eligible for a transfer. So these are not additional permits.
So I'm having a hard time with that. If it comes out of the existing permits that are issued by the Wildlife and Parks and they set those numbers, then I guess what's the point of this bill? Last year we issued 179,000 deer tags. So if we're not increasing that number and that's going to come out of existing tags, how does that work?
Representative Corbett.
A couple of things that need to be brought to your committee's attention. Chris Tymason stated in March 5th of 2018, I do not think that the deer transferable permits would do anything to adjust the deer population. Basically, these permits are already there. Someone has to give up a permit to sell a permit. So if a landowner doesn't want to give up his permit to try to sell it to transfer it to a non-resident, it doesn't happen. To give you an example, 2019, 19 and 20, over 4,600 out-of-state permits were not filled. There's 43 million acres of farm ground. And if it wasn't for the farmers and the ranchers for raising all the wildlife for free and housing it for free, there wouldn't be a wildlife in parks or a place to hunt. These guys do all this for nothing. And they really shouldn't even have to buy this tag. But all they're asking is to take one of their tags that they are not going to use themselves, buy it and transfer it to a non-resident if they want to participate. To give you an example of the dollars you're talking about, this is an economic situation here. 4,600 tags, according to the National Shooting Sports Foundation.
Representative, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I'm sorry.
You want to wait until we open the proponent testimony to go through that? Thanks. Are there any other questions for the reviser?
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Carpenter, do you want to hold yours until?
I'm not going to testify. I just want some clarification on
Okay.
the number of tags that were going to be issued, and if it is related to what the Wildlife and Parks issues when they issued their tags. If it's no more than that, I think that's very important to this bill. And so if it's in addition to that, I think that's important also. So that's all I'm saying here. If it stays within what Wildlife and Parks believes that we can harvest as a sustainable resource and in our harvest data, that's a whole different thing than adding 50,000 more permits for landowners and tenants.
So it is my understanding, that was one of the changes we made last year, was to make it so that these would not be additional. They would have to be a landowner's current permit that they would sell and not use themselves. Charles, is that right, or am I misinterpreting it?
Chairman, that's my understanding of the language of the bill, is that it merely permits transfer of a permit that the landowner or tenant is entitled to.
Right, so one of the concerns that a lot of people had over the last couple of bills was that we would have way too many deer permits issued and that people would be running around hunting in areas that they shouldn't be. So that's why I think that's why we limited it to a landowner's deer permit to hunt on their land only. And so if that's not the way it is, correct me, but that was my understanding.
Okay. I'm interested in clarifying that.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've enjoyed my increased popularity over the last week, hearing from hunters, Kansas hunters from across the country, and I just wanted to be sure that we in no way diminished the number of resident licenses that were issued. Does it impair the other hunters in their efforts to obtain a license or change it in any way?
I'm sorry, Representative, I'm not quite sure I understand your question. Maybe Charles did.
If I understand your question correctly, Representative, you were asking whether this bill would restrict in any way the number of resident licenses that would be issued. And I don't believe the bill would do that because the way the bill is drafted, landowners or tenants who are entitled to a big game permit under the hunt on your own land big game permit system already in existence are the persons who could make one transfer. So it does not appear to me that this bill would restrict the number of available licenses to residents.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to the proponent section. And we'll start with Representative Corbett.
Thank you, Chairman. The nice thing about this bill, we're here to try to represent a couple of things. The farmers and the ranchers, they do all the heavy lifting. They raise all the wildlife for Kansas, and they provide a lot of places for people to hunt already. This just gives them a chance. If you're a farmer and a landowner, you qualify with the 80 acres, you want to give up your tag and sell it to an out-of-stater, it's a 1-for-1. You've given up your hunt for someone else. It gives you a chance maybe to reimburse yourself for crop deprivation or whatever. Right now, there's 105 counties full of farmers and ranchers that could use the extra money, not counting when an out-of-state hunter comes to the Kansas. The National Shooting Sports Foundation says they will spend somewhere between $1,000 and $1,200 worth of dollars for tourism. That's convenience stores, restaurants, cafes, hotels, motels. And I can guarantee you that rural Kansas could use a little cash in their pockets after what they've been through this year. This is kind of a win-win for everybody. The department makes money. The physical note on this is for every out-of-state hunter that comes here, they'll sell them an out-of-state license for about maybe $100. It's about that. Plus, they'll sell a license to the landowner. And I'll tell you that people who I've talked to in some of your rural areas, after what they've been through, these farmers and ranchers, if you probably don't understand this, most of them are kind of in their 50s plus. And if they could find a way to maybe sell a deer permit and maybe pay a little property tax or help out on some repairs, it would be a blessing to them. I'll stand for questions.
Question for Representative Corbett. Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I'm a landowner and I get my permit, my deer tag, and I want to transfer it, if I transfer it to an out-of-stater, which is the purpose of this, does that out-of-stater then have to pay the state the out-of-state rate for that tag?
Well, the way I see it is the landowner's already bought the tag, and then you're going to transfer the tag for whatever you would want. You could give it to him or whatever, or for an access fee, and he could hunt on your property you own only. The thing, well, I think the other big asset to this will be, it should open up a lot of private property to public access. I think both residents and non-residents will see a benefit to this. And if they can see that by raising a little habitat and doing a little better job, there's a chance to make some money, maybe they'll do some habitat improvement. But I think in your case, all they have to do is just, once you buy the tag, you've got to find somebody that wants it. If you don't own it, or maybe, I've had a lot of people call me, like if you have family that's not blood relation, you'd like to have them come back and hunt, they're ready to go.
Charles, I believe, does this bill allow for the Parks and Rec to charge a transfer fee?
Yes, Chairman, it does. And you can see that on the first page of the bill, lines 27 through 33. They can charge a transfer fee that's not to exceed half the cost of a non-resident hunting permit issued under another statute, applicable statute. And then also not to exceed the cost of the original permit for the regular landowner or tenant hunt on your own land big game permit. So there is a provision for the Secretary to charge a transfer fee.
Does that answer your question? Any other questions for Representative Corbett? Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative, I'm just curious, how much would you be selling a deer permit for to somebody out of state?
Representative Corbett.
I would probably determine on the farmer or the rancher, the land he has to hunt, and those would be the factors probably to determine that.
So it could kind of become a bidding war, a little bit of a bidding war, perhaps.
Well, I doubt if it'd be a bidding war, but at least, I think at least it puts somebody who's doing all the work, raising all the wildlife, it puts them at least on the table where they should be able to participate.
Any general idea of how much that would, a deer permit would bring in to a farmer?
It's been, I don't know. I mean, it's whatever. You're buying the access. You know, it's just like when you drive down and you see if you see some great deer habitat, some good deer country, it would take a while before everybody's going to be able to find a level playing field. But what it's going to do is places that were probably never allowed to be hunted should open thousands of acres of fresh hunting ground for people to be part of now.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would imagine it would have a lot to do with supply and demand, and you know, there'll be some farmers that'll bring their non-blood relatives in and probably give it to them, but there'll be some that could charge several $1,000s if they had a good habitat. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I can actually ask this question of Wildlife and Parks if they're going to be here. I don't see their testimony on our lineup, or I may have missed it. So I wanted to, if they're not going to be here, then I'll ask the question of Representative Corbett. Okay.
I believe the secretary's here.
Is it, do we have their testimony?
I believe we do.
Okay, I'll keep searching for it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none.
One more comment for the secretary when he comes up. One suggestion that might be as a friendly thought to this, that when they sell the transferable tag, send a postcard to collect the person's name and data, and maybe what they were lucky enough to get or not, so that it'd give them a mailing source to maybe sell a license again next year or get some info on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. We've got was it Dean Lar, Kansas Livestock Association. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chairman Tarwater and members of the committee. My name is Dean Clare. I serve on staff at the Kansas Livestock Association, where we represent over 5,700 livestock producers across the state, ranging anywhere from cow-calf producers to feedlots, as well as a growing number of swine and dairy facilities. We're here today as a proponent of House Bill 2331, and the revisor did cover many of the key provisions that this bill includes. And to answer some of the questions, one thing that I would like to point out is this doesn't increase the number of permits that are available. It only changes what people or landowners who are eligible to receive a permit can do with that permit. I often get asked why the Livestock Association or why producers would be interested in deer hunting, and it doesn't take long to realize that our livestock producers, our farmers and ranchers, do far beyond just producing grain, forage, and livestock for the state. They also manage our state's natural resources located on privately held land. Kansas is proudly ranked number 2nd as far as the portion of the state that is privately held, meaning that landowners are in charge of over 98% of the state's natural resources. It's also not uncommon for farmers and ranchers who are small business owners to become entrepreneurs and find different avenues for revenue. Many operations have included that fee hunting become part of their program. Fee hunting has no direct correlation with the farm economy, and so in years where the farm economy is down, this allows an additional revenue source that a farmer or rancher can depend on. Additionally, we have a handful of members who have allowed this or have taken advantage of this opportunity to allow the next generation of their family farm to return back to the operation, to return back to rural Kansas, whereas if they were relying solely on the income of the farm or ranch, that might not be possible. So what issues are we seeing? Why is this bill coming forward? And that's because not every non-resident hunter who wants to come hunt in our state is given the opportunity because of the demand. And most years, I believe it's 8 or 9 out of 10 years, a non-resident hunter who enters the draw will receive a permit. However, not every year. And that continuity, that smoothness, that guarantee that an out-of-state hunter can come in and hunt and work with that local farmer and rancher to hunt on their property is essential for the continuity of that business. You know, we talk a lot about sustainability in agriculture, and for this to be a sustainable business model, farmers and ranchers need to have the guarantee that they can do this every year. 9 years, 8 years out of 10 years they can, but not every single year. And if that year comes where a non-resident hunter who normally comes to that specific ranch to hunt isn't given the opportunity, then halfway through the year that farmer or rancher all of a sudden finds themselves not being able to receive a check that they were planning on receiving that year. And that's not a very smart business model. Another side effect or negative of current statutes that don't guarantee a non-resident hunter the ability to do this that I would like to point out is that non-resident hunters have a high passion for coming to the state of Kansas to hunt. This is where they want to come harvest their deer. And when they can't guarantee that, some of them will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, to simply buy property so that they can be a landowner. Then they can simply go over the counter and purchase a hunt-owned land permit. Now, instead of working with the local farmer or rancher to pay them for the opportunity to hunt on their property, now they have their own property that a lot of times isn't as well taken care of as a local landowner would do, and that's where we see increased opportunities for invasive species such as the eastern red cedar, some noxious weeds to approach onto our properties more than if a resident farmer or rancher was the one managing that land. One last thing that I would like to point out is at one time Kansas law allowed for this to happen, and then when that changed, Wildlife and Parks adapted and increased the allotment of non-resident hunting permits to exceed or meet the demand. But over time, the amount of non-resident hunters who are interested in our state has grown, and the demand's increased, but the ability for them to come hunt here and be a part and spend money in our economy has not got along with that. And so in return, you're turning away willing non-residents who want to come spend their money here away from that opportunity to work with the local farmer or rancher. And with that, I would stand for any questions from the committee. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Can you tell me, do you know what some of the other states, there are quite a few states that do this, and are the programs successful in those states?
So I'm not exactly familiar with a lot of the other states that would have this sort of system. I know in our neighboring states such as Missouri or Nebraska, if I did my research correctly, non-resident hunters have the opportunity to go purchase these tags over the counter, whereas that's not an option in Kansas. Now, some other states can be more restrictive, but that is what a couple of our neighboring states who also have sought-after deer herds are doing.
Okay, any questions? Any online? Representative Shu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just that last part of it, are some of those restrictions possible, like caps on how much you can pay for the fee, or is that one of them?
Not to my knowledge, but this bill would create a cap on that transfer fee from the Wildlife and Parks, that transfer fee to move this from the landowner to the non-resident hunter who wants to purchase the permit. Nothing in this bill would restrict what the original owner of that could charge for the permit.
Representative Corbett.
was nice to see your testimony today. I think sometimes we forget just how much property tax farmers and ranchers pay and how much crop deprivation some of the critters they raise cause. This just kind of opens the door for a chance maybe to see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm glad for your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Clayton, did you have a question? Okay. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much. Committee, we have 3 written only proponents. Are there any other proponents online or in person for this bill? Seeing none. We'll move on to opponents of the bill. Representative Will Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Committee. I guess the first part of my bill here, probably there's some discrepancies in the amount of permits that we're actually talking about. And so we can strike the 99,000, but I would like to have an answer about how many landowners there are, how many potential folks that are available for this permit. So with that, good afternoon, Committee. Appreciate you letting me testify here. It's kind of weird being on this end of the stick here, but anyway. I should offer my support to this bill to destroy the deer hunting in Kansas as we know it. We should offer 99,000 extra deer permits in Kansas. We ought to just go over the counter, because if we'll wipe out 60 years of careful deer management in this state in just a few years, and then when we get through with that, people will understand why I rail so much against this bill. I was a Wildlife and Parks Commissioner in the late 90s when we had transferable permit system. It was difficult to enforce and unpopular. To get rid of that system, the agency agreed to raise non-resident permits to offset that issue. And you've heard testimony to that. Fast forward to where we are now, non-residents are receiving 24% of the tags. I stand opposed to this bill, not for me, but for our kids, our grandkids, and our residents. Deer hunting permit sales for residents have been declining for some years now due to lack of access. This bill would only add to that decline. Most landowners already have the opportunity to make money off of deer by leasing their land. I don't have a problem with that. As a matter of fact, I participate in that. The land can be leased for $5 to $10 an acre. Most of the prime hunting land is already leased for deer hunting. Believe it or not, there are trained wildlife managers out there that know more than legislators. They go to college and are well trained to manage deer, and they've done an excellent job in Kansas. We are a top destination for out-of-state trophy hunters, ranking in the top 10 nationally. That's what's fueling the demand for the non-resident permits. But there's more to this. It's about the resource. It's about sustaining the resource. Deer in Kansas and how to sustain the resource for the future. As a Wildlife and Parks Commissioner in the past, I was always about creating hunting opportunities, always, and I still am. That said, first and foremost is making sure that the resource can withstand the pressure of increased harvest so that it's there for all hunters, residents, non-residents alike, our kids and our grandkids. Those folks will not be coming here anymore to hunt if we deplete that resource. I ask this committee to please get informed and educated on this important issue. I would ask you think about the unintended consequences of this bill, and I implore and beg you to think about the impact of this bill on one of our most important natural resources. Please. Now I'll read something my grandson wrote after harvesting his first deer, and hopefully very much more. Gramps and Grammy, today might just be the funnest day of my life. I love you. See you next time. Jack. Thank you.
Representative Miller had a question for you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good.
Thank you for your testimony, Representative Carpenter. Given the restrictions that are on this bill, that only the landowner who already has a deer permit can transfer it, I'm not really catching your argument that that's going to impact the population.
Well, I think there are some details to be worked out in that, quite frankly. Last time it was a little bit different, Bill, because you could hunt on the land if it's in a different county. We have also deer unit areas, so one permit is, we have 15, 14, 12 units. So if it's on the edge of that unit, does he get to hunt in a unit 12 or is in 14? So there are some details to be worked out about that. It sounds very simple, and this bill, I will tell you, is simpler than the one that we had before, because the other one was very complicated, and this is simpler. But I think there are some details, as well as how many permits will be issued. You know, that was news to me that we were talking about not adding to the permits. So I find it hard to believe that we're not going to add to any deer permits, and these are going to come out of the ones that we've already issued. So that's fine with me, but it's going to do little to address the 2,000 non-resident hunters that we have that apply that don't get chosen every year or draw.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, Representative Carpenter, are you familiar with a group known as Kansas Backcountry Hunters and Anglers?
Vaguely.
But you happen on to them, you might convey them that I went from my natural revulsion to anything Representative Corbett introduces to being a supporter of this bill. Thank you.
That I can't speak to.
I think there was a comment.
Further questions? Oh, sorry. I'm on the wrong end of this deal here. Sorry.
Can you help explain the leasing of the land? So you said you participate in that. If a farmer had, say, 80 acres of land, he could lease that land, and would the people leasing the land then automatically be able to purchase deer tags?
No, what I usually see, especially in the area that I hunt, is it's a group of guys come in and they'll lease the land, and then they know that not every year one of them may not get drawn. There may be 2 or 3 guys that lease that land, and there may be a year that a guy sits out, but the other years, the other tenant, the other leasees will be able to hunt that land. I've become very good friends with a couple of guys. There's 4 of them actually from Louisiana that hunt on the land next to mine. Great guys. They ended up buying a small house that was kind of, a lady had passed away, and they ended up buying a small house just to stay in when they came up here in deer season. So there are room for those folks up here. Like I said, everybody I know that has deer and good deer habitat rents their property. And for good money, too.
Representative Corbett.
Thank you. You talk about stewards of the land. I think there's no better steward than a farmer or rancher. He sees the wildlife he's got every day. He knows what he's got there far better, far more often than anybody either that would work for the department or otherwise. And the thing that I see here from Chris Tymason, his statement simply says, transferable permits would do nothing to adjust the population. I mean, he wouldn't have said that unless he'd have thought that out. I'm kind of like this. We're not adding a permit. The guy has given up one to get one. That's the intent of this bill. It's not. That's the good part of it, I think.
And I hope that's clarified, quite frankly, in what I read in that bill by the revisers. So back to your further question, I'm certainly not going to get into it about landowners not being good stewards of the land. I'm one. I have food plots all over my land. I understand the value of taking care of the resource in my land, and I respect every farmer and rancher out there for what they do for wildlife in Kansas. So I'm not going to get down that deal, and you're not going to pigeonhole me on that one, Betty. So,
Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you.
thank you very much.
Brad Lovelace, are you here in person? You are. Okay. Secretary of the Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Tarwater and members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to speak before you this afternoon. I think hopefully you've all found our written testimony because it addresses nearly all of the comments and questions that have come up. One thing I might mention before I start is the idea that no more permits will be issued that have been issued in the past is absolutely wrong. It is absolutely wrong. Landowners right now, if you own 80 acres or more, as has been mentioned, have the potential for every 80 acres and every family member associated with that to get a tag. Clearly, all those aren't being issued. In our testimony, you'll see that amount is based on the information we got from the Kansas Association of Counties is about 99,000, huge number. Clearly, those aren't being used right now. They could be used, right? Those are potential landowner permits that aren't being used. So if we institute this bill, then, and you increase the marketability of those, which clearly you do, that's when the lid comes off, right? Those become of great value and the numbers go up. So the conversation about the number of permits that can be issued, there's a potential there that's not being realized because landowners use them for themselves and their families. When you say you can sell that to anybody from out of state, then that number will obviously go up. And that's the change that nobody knows what the end of that is. So I'll get to my testimony. House Bill 2331, we created a transferable deer permit system. We oppose that. Deer hunting in Kansas is a valued tradition among resident and non-resident hunters, supports a wide array of hunting-related businesses that contribute significantly to Kansas rural economies. Hunters are drawn to Kansas by the high-quality deer herd that produces trophy-class deer year over year. A herd produced not by luck, but by professional and scientific management. Deer management in Kansas is a dynamic process that seeks balancing between competing interests, like we've heard from today, hunting opportunities while maintaining the resource at a level that society will tolerate. The provisions of this bill could potentially undermine much of what makes Kansas deer hunting so attractive and would further erode resident hunter opportunities. And that's a really important point that I know a representative mentioned over the Zoom, and we'll address that. As history demonstrated when transferable deer permits were allowed in 1999, this method of permit distribution is both unwieldy and unpopular and therefore unwise. We've already tried this experiment, it failed, and we've gone on from that. Under the current permitting and management system, which provides balanced benefit to all stakeholders, non-resident hunters make up 24% of Kansas total deer hunters. That's a huge number. When you look at other states who have trophy deer populations like we do, that it's much less. In fact, non-resident deer hunters in other Midwestern states make up 10% or less. Iowa, another trophy deer state, issues just 6,000 tags among the 20,000 non-resident applicants annually. So they're a tiny fraction of the demand in Iowa. Kansas is far, far more than that, at 24%. For the 2020 Kansas deer season, 24,240 applications were received from non-residents. 22,000 of those permits were allocated. So that means a success rate of 91%. So if you compete in Iowa or Colorado, other places that have a great reputation, you'll wait years to get a permit. So very different here in Kansas. The most concerning impacts of this bill include the continued decline in resident hunter participation, just what you all have been discussing, and the eventual reduction in trophy class bucks in the population. The number of resident deer hunters has declined by nearly 13,000. 13,000 in the short 5-year span between 2015 and 2019. When we survey our hunters, and we survey all of our hunters and fishermen to the greatest extent that we can, a primary reference point, a primary reason why they are no longer applying for permits is because they can't get access like they used to. This bill will fuel the process of leasing up land that certainly every landowner is allowed to. This will add fuel to that fire and increase that desire to lease up more land, make it unavailable for resident hunters. Making transferable deer permits available to anyone who owns 80 acres would obviously create an increase in the number of permits for non-residents. Data provided by the Department of Revenue shows more than 99,000 landowners who own 80 acres or more. 99,000. Even a small fraction of those, if they were to participate in this suggested program, would significantly change the way we manage deer in Kansas. Non-resident deer hunters deer permits are coveted in large part because they are limited, and this limited nature contributes to the mystique of Kansas deer hunting. Landowners who have successfully managed buck harvest, creating value and access on their land, has been mentioned by several, will find that task much more difficult when thousands of additional permits are added and hunting pressure on neighboring lands increase. The thing you have to remember is deer have a big home range. In eastern Kansas, it can routinely be 2 or 3 sections. In western Kansas, double that. So very seldom is that deer that I see on my land just on my land. I'm sharing it with my neighbors. And this will create competition. So my neighbor wants to get that deer harvested quickly by someone so they can make money off of it. And that's a deer that we share. So that's not a good incentive to create. Another unintended consequence of this bill will likely be the difficulty in regulating the deer herd, which is controlled largely by the harvested does. This gets to Representative Corbett's comment. He quoted our lead attorney, Chris Tymason, a couple of years ago, that when non-residents come, they want to hunt bucks. That's why they pay a lot of money to come to Kansas. They aren't interested in hunting does. And that's the essence of that comment, Representative, is they aren't coming to harvest does, and doe harvest is what regulates the deer herd. Resident deer hunters are much more likely to harvest does than non-residents. In 2019, fewer than half of the non-resident hunters took a white-tailed doe, even though each received a combination permit. So each had a doe permit. Resident hunters killed 3 times more antlerless deer than non-residents. So it's the residents that do the work to control the herd by harvesting does. Now, it's difficult for some people to understand this idea. The state's so big, there's so many deer. How can the effect of harvesting more deer affect the population? So an example I give, I got a note from a constituent of Representative Corbett's the other week asking about fish lengths in one of our reservoirs, and it's a perfect analogy. In that reservoir, they were saying, you should let us harvest these walleye when they're at a smaller size. But we have data after data, example after example of when you reduce that, you drive the average size of those fish down, right? So in the case of a deer population, that's for walleye. In the case of a deer population, you get what our neighbors have got. So people are harvesting 2- and 3-year-old deer instead of 5- and 6-year-old deer, which are trophies, right? That's the difference, and that's what happens when you take the top off the harvest limits. The department is confident this bill will have a negative impact on deer hunting in Kansas, and the real value, Kansas' reputation, we currently hold as being a trophy deer destinations. Landowners have complete control to charge hunters whatever the market will bear right now by giving access to their land. And this value will likely fall if permits are nearly unlimited. This has been an experiment that's tried and failed, was revoked by the Kansas Legislature in 2007. In effect, we believe this is going to potentially kill the goose that's laying golden eggs. The department appreciates the support of the committee in opposing House Bill 2331 and the opportunity to address the committee. I'd stand for questions if you'd like.
Thank you, sir. I got a couple of questions. The the statute that was changed in 2007 it wasn't as limited as this, right? I mean, it was completely different.
Well,
Was
yeah.
it identical to this law that we're looking at today?
I can't say that it was identical. The idea was you issue landowner permits that they can transfer. So the concept was similar. I'm sure the details varied a little bit.
It was, I don't know that it was limited to one per landowner. And that brings me to my next question. You said currently you have 91% of the people that apply get a deer tag from out of state. Right. How many did you say that applied, and how many did you give out?
So we give out about 22,000 per year, so it's just over 24,000 applied, I think, this last season.
So if this bill was in effect last year, roughly 2,000 people would have gotten a deer tag from a landowner that gave up theirs. So it's not like that doesn't sound like 99,000.
I'm not sure. That was the draw that they do through us. It would be a totally different mechanism if they were working directly with landowners, because if I'm a landowner and I can get 4 permits, then that's how many I can potentially market to an out-of-state resident.
But this bill limits it to 1.
No, the way this bill is written, it's 1 per 80 acres. That's currently the way the landowner permits are issued.
That is not the way this bill is written. It's the landowner gets 1 per 80 acres, but any individual landowner can only sell 1 deer tag.
Right, so I can, but if I'm a landowner and I have 320 acres and 3 kids, right, then we're all landowners, so we could get 1 for each 80-acre parcel, so I can get 4 for my 320. That's the way this bill's written. Another comment, just to clarify, there was a question about where you can use this. When you get a landowner tenant permit, you can hunt anywhere in the state. So this makes it available. That's the way the law is written now. So this makes it available for that person. If you transfer that, it can be used anywhere, not just on that land, anywhere in the state.
Well, your testimony is directly opposite from what our revisers are saying, and
we would welcome the chance to clarify that.
Maybe we could get you guys together to make sure that that's the case, because if what you're saying is true, that was not the intent of this bill, and it needs to be changed.
Yeah, we believe there are unintended consequences here, and we would welcome the chance to work that out with the reviser by just going back to the statute.
Perfect. And Representative Miller has another question.
Could we get research to provide the testimony that was offered surrounding the legislation in 2007? And could you, Mr. Secretary, provide whatever documentation you have to support your very important final sentence here? This is an experiment that has been tried, failed, and was revoked in 2007. I'd like to see the evidence that existed that showed that, quote, the experiment was tried and failed.
Okay. Well, the final result was that this body voted it down.
I'm not asking for an answer to that question, but could you provide us any documentation that you have, please? And again, I think we might find a lot of that within the testimony that provoked the change in legislation in 2007. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Any other questions? Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think I have more questions during testimony than I did before I arrived here today. And one is that I'm looking at the fiscal note, and the fiscal note tells us very little. I'm wondering if you can provide a secretary a little clear understanding of what the non-resident fees that you have brought in annually, maybe comparing a few years, and also showing the number of permits and how that fluctuates compared with the population, the herd population, or just something that we can see some trends of what's happening and what would be the effect if this bill were to be passed. Because right now it's very unclear, is the permit capped, is it not capped, how many, bucks, does, all of that. And for example, even your comparisons in your testimony about Iowa and 6,000 versus our 22,000. I don't know if we have the same type of buck numbers as they have. I don't know any of that to make any type of comparison. And I'm just feeling like we don't have the data in front of us to even make a good sound judgment here. So it would require more than 1 year. It would require 3 or 4 years so we could compare what this would do. What is the impact?
So I've got our data. I'm glad to pass it on to you of our permits issued numbers over the last about, I think, 30 years maybe. So I'm glad to share that with you right now. And we can share any of that with all the committee. That we're a science-driven entity, and we're glad to share that.
That'd be great if you could get that to us, Representative Williams.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate 30 years, and for some of you, 30 years will be, you'll love that. But for me, maybe something a little simpler, a simplified chart, maybe the past 5 years that kind of gives us some of that information broken down. Thank you.
Okay.
Representative Dodson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of things. Number one, one of the sources says that in 2016 we had about 640,000 deer, and now we've got about 700,000. So first question is that the management number that we're working towards, or does it fluctuate 50,000 or so? Is that kind of the objective?
It clearly does fluctuate, and what we have a formula that involves a lot of factors, harvest survey information, deer vehicle accidents, a lot of things that lead us to set those limits in all the different zones around the state. There clearly is fluctuation year in, year out, but we don't have a specific numerical target. If we have wet weather, then the population can expand based on that. But we are really trying to manage for a high quality, sustainable yield, because that's what business owners want. That's what they want, predictability, and that keeps folks coming back year after year.
The last question is, I'm trying to make sure I understand the numbers. So we had 179,000 total permits issued. And what you were saying, as I understand it, is that out of the 99,000 landowners who were eligible, right, some smaller number were included in that 179,000.
Right.
So if there is no stated limit, that number can go up. Is that what you were saying?
Exactly right.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Representative Carpenter. And I'll remind the committee that we still have 2 people that need to testify today.
Very good. And I certainly don't want to step on any of your testimony, but the bottom line is this is not a population management bill. These folks aren't going to come here to Kansas to kill does. And if I remember in 2007, that was one of the major factors, was that we needed population control, which means residents to kill the does. So very few non-residents want to come here to kill a doe. They can kill them in their home state, and then you have the additional hassle of getting the meat home and all that kind of stuff. So this is not a population control bill. So just remember that. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Secretary.
Representative Corbett.
To make this clear, this is not a 2007 bill. This is a new bill, very restrictive, and very cleaned up from 2007 that gives the department considerable oversight and management. And if they would use it properly, it would be a great tool for advertising and deer management. But a quick note about habitat and whatever. Kansas charges $442 for an out-of-state deer tag, plus a hunting license. Missouri's $265, Oklahoma's $300. So it lets you know where everybody's at. This bill's not going to restrict any non-resident from ever finding a place to hunt. I've told everybody that's called me, if you live here, you're closer to the landowners than anybody coming here from out of state. Just get in your car, drive out to a farm or a ranch or whatever you like, and try to just ask. I mean, the days are maybe be numbered that you can just drive down the road and jump out of your car, go hunting for nothing. But the locals, the non-residents have the first opportunity to get all the best spots. They live here. This is just a backup plan, and I don't understand why you object to the landowners and farmers just having a small say in how they can manage their own little spot of ground. But I thank you for your testimony.
Okay, we're gonna have to move on to Brad Rother, Grandpa Boone's Cabin and Outfitters. Tim Dongus, are you here in person? Come on up. I'm sorry that we've gotten to the point to where time is limited. So if you could keep it minimal, that'd be great.
Understand. I've got another hearing at 3:30. My name's Tim Dongus from El Dorado, Kansas. I'm with the National Deer Association, which formerly before then was the Quality Deer Management Association. I'm a resident here in Kansas. I'm a landowner, own land in Butler County, Marion County, and also Greenwood County. Through the National Deer Association, of course, we look at legislation not just in Kansas, but across the United States. One of the things that's been brought up a couple times, and I'll just hit briefly on it, was the bill itself. One, we want to make sure landowners don't get themselves in trouble. The language of the bill itself, I believe, needs to be clarified, because the last thing I want to see is a game warden going out and citing a non-resident or a landowner. When it referred to, is it just one permit for 1,000 acres or one permit per 80 acres? Because the bill itself references 32-937G, which states that it's one per 80 acres, which was already previously brought up. I think that something with that needs to be clarified. To me, you know, maybe it's just me that doesn't make any sense, but it does appear to be confusing. The other thing that I would like to point out is the disease part of our deer management in the state of Kansas. Every once in a while we experience what's called EHD, epizootic hemorrhagic disease, which can really hammer our deer herd. If we go ahead and we set a standard where, say, 40,000 landowners or 10,000 landowners can go ahead and get permits, if we do get a disease situation, how are we going to adjust for that within the agency? Do we limit the resident hunters in order to adjust for disease, or how does that adjustment take place? Our last disease that hit us here in Kansas, in eastern Kansas, was 2010, 11, and 12, I believe. Iowa just got hit this past year from it. So one of those factors we need to think about is how do we adjust for the number of hunters, our resident hunters and non-resident hunters, if we do get hit by disease, in order to bring that deer herd back to protect against the quality. The other thing, of course, that we do here in the United States is we put out a whitetail deer report. We collect information from every agency here in the lower 48, along with Canadian provinces. The state of Kansas, when this was last published in 2019, was listed as number 4 highest percentage of non-residents that come to the state. And the gentleman from the Kansas Livestock Association, which he's spot on, we're number 2 in the United States when it comes to private land ownership. And so there's a displacement that has occurred over the years from residents finding access to quality hunting property. I don't have a problem because I can afford to pay for it. I'll pay $10,000 to a local resident outfitter for a high quality deer hunt because I can afford to do that. I will pay $30 an acre. I will pay $50 an acre. I just looked at $50 an acre in Osage County for leasing. I've seen what happened in the state of Illinois 20 years ago, because I didn't originally grow up in Kansas. I moved here specifically for whitetail deer hunting 20 years ago. Majority of almost every farmer in what we used to call the Golden Triangle in the state of Illinois became an outfitter. So is the opportunity going to still be there for our residents is one of our big concerns. And I think we have a responsibility to somewhere, and I'm a big fan of landowners, huge fan, but I do believe we have a responsibility to maintain balance within the system, so we have opportunities for non-residents and residents within the state of Kansas. I believe there's a better way to go about this than what has been currently offered. There's a system in the United States been used for decades called a Deer Management Assistance Program. It first started in the state of Mississippi in 1976, and a lot of states have come on board with it, and it is meant to work with landowners where a biologist actually comes out on the property, can issue, basically write you a prescription of how many buck tags you can have and how many doe tags you can have. It's based on science. And we believe that's a much better system than what we're currently looking at here today. This is a short-term, I think, deal, but long-term, we need to move into a better system. So I would respectively, whether we recommend this today or down the road, I would love to see Wildlife and Parks go to a Deer Management Assistance Program. I really would. I believe it's the long-term solution to what we're here for today. I think it benefits everybody. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions right away. If there are questions, would you contact him individually, please? Thank you.
Thank you.
Laura Mendenhall, Kansas Wildlife Federation, are you here? Are you online? Okay, we'll move her to written only. Brad Rother, are you here or online? Okay, we'll move you to written only. Lauren Sill from Hutchison.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to committee.
Pardon?
Welcome to committee.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to address my concerns to you today. My name's Lauren Sill. I'm from Hutchison, Kansas. I'm here representing no one but myself. As a lifelong resident of Kansas, well, most of my life, as a deer hunter and avid outdoors woman, I speak for no one but myself today. In clear disclosure, I am on the commission for the Department of Wildlife and Parks, but what I say today comes purely from my heart and is only in regards to myself. It has nothing to do with anyone else. I can't afford $50 an acre. My dad and I used to hunt on a ranch where he had hunted for 20-some years, and when transferable permits came along, we used to pay, and this was back in the 80s, so as a young adult, you know, a couple $100 was quite a bit to me then. We'd pay a couple $100 to be able to hunt non-exclusively. We shared the opportunity with family and friends, but our portion, our arrangement, we paid a couple $100. Transferable permits came along. $200 one year, $10,000 a piece the next. You can shake your head, but that's the honest to God truth. We can't just drive down, as resident hunters can't drive down the road. There are landowners who will let people hunt for free and for reasonable access, but many of us, it's unaffordable. So we end up hunting public land, and I'm going to address that in a minute. Deer hunters aren't attracted to quantity, and many are thinking, there's so many deer in Kansas. There are. But what this will have the effect of doing is non-residents aren't going to come and spend all the money to come here and shoot does. That's already been addressed. They'll shoot bucks. When you take out a certain proportion of bucks from the population, you reach a tipping point that is virtually unrecoverable. In 1965, there were about 10,000 deer Not 10,000 hunters, 10,000 deer in the state of Kansas. It took 30 years to build to where we were. We can't afford to lose the quality. This bill will negatively impact that. Landowners have every right, and Mr. Carpenter addressed this, and I support it. They have every right to do what they want with their land, to lease it to whom they want, to let access to whom, and to deny it to whomever they want. Using a state law to simplify or guarantee your leasing process so that you just lease it to the same person year after year isn't a good business plan. Just because a non-resident may not draw a permit, and that's a may not, it's a very small percentage, doesn't mean that landowner can't lease their land that year. It just means they lease it to someone different, and it expands opportunities for those non-residents that they're leasing to. The state's not responsible to support bad business plans. This bill does not place any responsibility on the landowner who sells the permit to provide a place to hunt. I have a copy of my landowner tenant tag. It's valid statewide. So a landowner can sell a permit and then deny them a place to hunt, which means those people then have to find either other private land or they end up on public land. There's no requirement that the landowner be even a licensed hunter. There were, I looked it up, 18,000 landowner tenant and hunt your own land tags sold in 1920 season, the 2019-2020 season. That 99,000, 18 is less than 20%. So you've got 80% of potential tags that were not sold that could be sold in the future. So that could jump from 18, it's not going to go to 99, we all know that, but it could be a significant jump in the number of tags available statewide. Our public lands are already overcrowded, and neither the natural resource nor hunter tolerance can accommodate any significant influx of additional hunters. Most resident hunters, folks, are not against non-resident hunters, but they're opposed to being driven out of hunting by the excess numbers of non-residents. This year, I hunt in south central Kansas in Unit 16. In the year 1819, in the seasons 1819, 50% of the bucks were taken by non-residents. For every resident, because success rates are about equal, for every resident that took a deer, there was a non-resident out there. In 1920, that jumped 10% to 60%. Non-residents are taking more deer in Unit 16 than residents are. This year, the rifle season's 12 days long. I was out at least 8 of them. I was hunting public land in western Pratt County. I saw my Reno County tag, one Kiowa County tag that belonged to the young man that I'm mentoring, one other Kiowa County tag, I don't know who it belonged to, one Pratt County tag that belonged to a department employee hunting on his own time, and 2 tags from Sedgwick County. During the deer season, I also saw tags from Washington, Utah, Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Arkansas, Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, North Carolina, and Alaska. Folks, we've run the residents out. They can't tolerate it anymore, and thus the 13,000 number decrease in resident hunters. These are your friends and your neighbors. Some can afford it, some can't. If I didn't hunt public land, it would be cheaper for me to go to Wyoming once every 7 years and hunt antelope up there. Because the rancher up there lets me come and hunt, but I can only get a permit once every 7 years. Why do we think non-residents should be entitled to a deer every single year in Kansas? Why? We're not stopping there being a rotation in who comes. In fact, you end up stimulating an appetite among more people that want to come. They just realize, I might have to wait a year or two. They don't need to be entitled to it.
Ma'am, I'm sorry.
Finally.
We're going to have to wrap it up.
My last point, well, one, it's discriminatory. This bill is elitist in that it gives preference to those with wealth and with those who can simply pay to bypass the system the general public must use. To treat our wildlife resources as commodities for the immediate benefit of a few instead of public resources is a betrayal of public trust. No one's mentioned the wildlife belongs to the people of Kansas, not to the Department of Wildlife and Parks, not to the government. They belong to you and to me. The government is responsible for holding them in public trust. That's you. To betray that trust is a slap in the face of Kansas residents. In addition, wildlife agencies can't sustain effective wildlife management under the principles of sound conservation if legislative intervention disregards and overrides a principled approach to conservation. A balanced approach to non-resident hunting can benefit all, while a landowner or financially driven system will benefit few in the short term at the expense of the majority. Thank you. I appreciate your patience.
Thank you for your testimony, and I'm sorry we don't have time for questions. We also have to end this meeting right now. We have another committee that's going to meet in here in less than 10 minutes, and so my apologies to conferees that are still on the line. I would encourage the committee to read through the written portion of their comments and contact them with questions. And with that, we're closing the hearing and adjourning.